do this. So I think one of the things as we get started here today is we are going to be talking about kids in crisis. And where my heart gets real heavy is this idea that if periodically a child just burst into flames, we would be reacting a lot differently than we are today. But right now we're facing down this mental health crisis among children and adolescents here in the United States. And it's scary to me because I feel like we're not talking about it enough in the spaces in which we are talking about it. We're not leading with hope and healing and solutions. It's a lot of finger pointing and blaming, and sort of hyper focusing on a problem, but not leaning into making things better for our kids and adolescents. So my name is Dr. Kimberly Ernest. We are here on the How to Be Happy Hour. I'm a licensed psychologist and licensed professional counselor here in the state of Pennsylvania, as well as the Executive Vice President of Pennsylvania Counseling Services.
I'm Dr. Johnny Pierce. I'm licensed here in Pennsylvania as well as in Virginia. I've been in private practice for almost 2 years now, and I'm a PCS alum.
Yes.
My name is Emily Huffer. I am a clinician working in the clinics, but also the implementation director for outpatient services.
Hello, my name is Sarah Herr, and I'm a community outreach specialist with the Novo Detox.
And my name is Louis Bianco. I am a registered nurse and also a certified peer support specialist.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming in. I'm glad you were able to say it. Thank you all for coming in and joining us here today and talking about this exceptionally important conversation. This is going to be the first of a 3-part series that we're working on here at the How to Be Happy Hour, specifically looking at how we can better serve our kids and adolescents. So what I know is right now within our field, we're seeing a number of systemic challenges. We're seeing a number of barriers facing our kids and adolescents. And so from y'all's perspective, where do we begin this essential conversation?
I'll jump in. I was diagnosed with a mental illness in high school. Now that was in the early 2000s, so a lot of things have changed. But there is a lot of things that are still similar. And as far as where do we begin, I would say in general, we often portray mental health as synonymous with happiness versus mental health being more synonymous with something like balance or stability, because there are a number of emotions and discomforts like frustration or anger or sadness that don't necessarily mean we are ill.
Yeah.
They mean we are human.
Yes.
So I would just kind of tie a little knot around that and say that's one of the directions that is causing some of this confusion and slowing the process of what actual mental wellness is and how we get there.
Louis, I couldn't agree with you. I mean, that is the crux of the title of our podcast. Is this when I have somebody come in and they're starting out therapy and I say, hey, what brings you in? Well, I want to be happy. It's like, yikes, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because if you are a human being, you are going to suffer. You're going to have loss. You're going to have grief. You're going to have high highs and low lows. That's a fundamental part of the human experience. And so often we work so hard to avoid those lows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oftentimes making our situations worse instead of better, or
Right.
getting in our own way.
So they taught me early on, like, growth does not exist without something like fear. So if we are going to actually recover from some of these things we suffer from, discomfort is going to be part of it. And if our treatment somewhat involves the avoidance of discomfort altogether, we're not necessarily going to actually see the growth and maturation necessary to enter into a sustainable recovery.
Most
also-
definitely.
I think also something to point out too is whenever, because we're talking about children in crisis or clients or adolescents in crisis, is they are coming to us with this notion of, hey, I'm not okay, but I want to be okay, but everyone's telling me I need to be okay. So having that already pressure of mental health and not being able to express it in a way that feels comfortable to them or safe, it's a big ask at times when they're coming to us or coming into talking about their feelings and it's not going well.
Yeah. I typically try to talk about stress. Our relationship with stress has been charged.
Yeah.
Stress is seen as a negative, and we add the charge. If you think about it, your heart's beating right now because of stress. Your lungs function because of stress. stress is essential to life. And our relationship with it typically dictates whether we get wellness or not. So if we change that relationship, we see it as a normal thing, that there are going to be the highs and the lows. There are going to be the times when I'm upset, even though I'm okay. Or that other people are going to assess my wellness in a different way that I might. When we normalize that, we notice very quickly symptoms come down, energy changes, attitudes change, and then wellness becomes a goal. That, okay, what's wellness look like here, or how to be happy?
Well, and how do you pursue that happiness in a way that's values congruent, that's consistent with the things that are most important to you? And I mean, I can think about, I mean, you're a parent. No, okay. I'm pretty sure no on that side of the table. All right.
One day, maybe.
Yeah. yes. It's a delight and it's terrifying every day.
Every day.
Every day. But I think so often our kids come in and they say there is nothing that's more distressing to me than when my kids are experiencing distress. And so when even when they're coming to like their caretaker or a trusted teacher or an adult that they love, there's all these little meta messages coming back to them, like, you're not okay, then I'm not okay. Like we're pack animals, and so our nervous systems are communicating with one another. And so if my kiddos come in and they're in distress, it's my responsibility to regulate myself so that I can respond to them in an attentive way and not diminish or like try to shove down their reactions. But I think so often little humans are being told, like, we don't have room for that here. Go ahead and turn that off. We over-medicate our kids because of it. We create systems and constructs in which kids aren't able to be kids anymore in a lot of different ways. And we're seeing it now.
I think we also arouse things. I think the first test that any parent has is when the child falls down. Because the kid looks at you. Are you bursting into tears? Are you running over like this is the end of the world? Or is it okay to fall down? And if it's okay to fall down, oftentimes there are no tears. There's just getting right back up and going to whatever was being done. And that was a lesson that I had to learn the hard way.
I think that I love the conversation about happiness, because I think that's what I always struggled throughout life is I always wanted happiness because I think that's what we all talk about. Who doesn't want to be happy? So I never sat with that pain. And if I did for any second, I'm like, I can't handle this. So I need to find something to numb my feelings. I don't want to feel this pain. So I love bringing up happiness. And I think resilience is kind of something hopefully we can shift towards, is how to kind of handle and bounce back from life struggles.
I think that is so essential, and we don't pay enough attention to it. I was just talking to someone over lunch today about this idea that we live in a world now where we can essentially cultivate our social community pretty easily and pretty readily. And so, like, Johnny says something I don't like, well, then, like, I just don't ever talk to him again. And like, I'm out. I'll see you later, and that's the end of the relationship. And so we don't have that opportunity to repair and connect. We're not modeling that for the kids and adolescents. It's they said something that I didn't like, so they're canceled. Or and not to say that people don't cross lines and there shouldn't be social consequences for that. I absolutely believe so. And
rehabilitation.
Why aren't we leaning in a little bit here? I mean, when my kiddo is I have two beautiful boys. When they're the most challenging to me, that also is communicating to me that they are hurting and that I need to lean in and show up for them in that moment. I don't just need to be like, shut the fuck up, like that. Like, I want to do that sometimes. I'm sure every parent does, and if they say that they're liars,
all liars.
But also that's not creating space for them to have their process and go through that. So it's that balance of creating space and setting limits and parameters.
Funny you should say that, Lewis. You were making a comment earlier when we were talking about clinicians and providers and how they may not be attuned to themselves as they ask their clients to be more attuned.
Yes.
Feels very in line with this.
Yes. In general, I think what we're looking at, because awareness has become such a big topic, you have adults and children at the same time, or physicians and people receiving services, or people who are breaking the law and police. I mean, the list is endless, but you have everybody becoming aware of what their emotional and mental needs are at the same time. And who do you tell to deny or compromise what those needs are exactly? So what we were discussing earlier is, as someone with a mental illness, I've lived with bipolar now for 25 years. I'm not even 40 yet. It'll be over half of my life for the rest of my life. The amount of asks that have been made of me as far as my regulation, as far as my behaviors, and how aware I am of what comes out of my mouth and how I present my intense emotions, that's not being asked of the majority of our quote-unquote mentally healthy population. So if I walk in and I go to a restaurant and somebody's yelling at the server because their cheeseburger is cold, they're just frustrated. If I yell at my doctor because I'm very frustrated or disagree with a treatment direction, I'm showcasing symptoms that may lead me to a involuntary admission if I'm not careful. So we look at these things from these different perspectives. And when you're looking at children specifically, if you have an adult who's like, well, this is what I need, and the child's also learning to use that language of this is what I need, who compromises, who sacrifices, who takes a little less so that they can give. And I'm not saying I have the answer to that. I would say when I was growing up, it was more of the mindset that the adult sacrificed, that the adult compromised, and that the child received. But now that we have these greater awarenesses, we're all somewhat more cognizant of what our needs are at any given time. And I need to be healthy, and I deserve to be healthy.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big one.
So, that also interferes with the mental health and growth of our children.
One of the statistics that I, when I was searching specifically for today to look at, I mean, I know that we're in the midst of a mental health crisis for kids and adolescents because I live it. I recently withdrew my oldest from public education at a blue ribbon school. They love that bit because of just significant ongoing bullying. And no matter and I like to think I'm pretty savvy, right? I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm a public speaker by trade and profession. I'm fairly good at advocacy. I like to think that I know how to work a system. And by the time my husband and I made the difficult decision to pull him out of school, it just was like injury after injury, incident after incident, with no desirable intervention that felt effective at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I met with, I mean, you know me, I met with everybody. I went straight Karen, like I'm going.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but it's my kid,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I went to the teacher, the counselor, the assistant principal, the superintendent. Like, I continued to raise intensity in my advocacy because the experiences that I was watching in my kid, and I started watching this beautiful, energetic, brilliant little boy like go into his shell and start having like headaches and stomach aches and not wanting to go to school and not wanting to see his friends and coming home and like crashing on the couch and like just passing out. And like if you're raising boys, little boys, they don't pass out till they pass out. They don't stop moving. And so we started noticing these different things. And so what I think is significant, this article published by the American Psychological Association in 2022 suggests that suicide rates among children 10 and older have climbed significant 10 years old, and is now the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds behind unintentional injuries. And what the fuck, y'all? Like, what are we doing?
Well, this is my passion, is suicide prevention. So I'm so happy that you brought it up because that is what I always tell people. It's the second leading cause of death for adolescents in Pennsylvania. And I think when it comes to suicide and in the school system, I think that we need to start talking about it. I completely understand that it's a very touchy topic, and I'm sure it's really scary for a lot of people to discuss. And I think a lot of people have a lot of myths and stigma attached to it, as well as so many other things in the behavioral health care field. But stigma, it really derives from the lack of knowledge. So I think to kind of start combating that is by discussing it, to not normalize it, but make people feel like, okay, like suicide isn't this very scary word, like sometimes a lot of people do face suicidal ideation. It's kind of like we don't talk about it the way we talk about depression and anxiety, and it can be really isolating because it's scary. You don't want to feel like one of those people, in that sense of everyone talks about you in whispers, and you don't want people to walk on eggshells then if they find out kind of you have those suicidal ideations. So I think it's important to just start teaching prevention to adolescents and not just the teachers.
Most definitely. I think the way we talk about it, so literally had this happen, I think it was Tuesday, I had an emergency session with a client's son. Wasn't doing too hot, had communicated that to somebody, and they communicated to the parent. I asked the question, do you not want to live, or do you want to die? And that distinction is big. When someone does not want to live, there's typically an ellipses after that. And once you find out what's on the other side of the ellipses, you figure out how to intervene. So you don't want to live like this. You don't want to live with this pain. You don't want to live ... Finding out what's on the other end of that ... gives you the opportunity to say, okay, if we could make this better, if we could remove this, if we could diminish this in some way, then life goes back to being something that you can endure and overcome. If the person says, I want to die, that's a different conversation. It's a different intervention. It's not about removing things or adding things at that point. It's about maybe stabilizing and then attempting to, hey, let's do some motivational interviewing and figure out what you may have to live for. But we can't have either one of those conversations if we're so scared to talk about it that we don't until it's too late.
So I work in the clinic as a clinician now, but previously, before I made the transition to go into the clinic sense of providing services, I was a school-based therapist. So for 2 years, I was working with adolescents, primarily middle schoolers, and then I've had a couple
Which,
trickle
according to
of,
this, is our highest risk population.
I will say middle schoolers are my jam. At the beginning, I was like, nope, I'm not interested in that age range, and then it's severely switched right as we continued or started to talk to each other. But one thing I noticed is it's talked about, like within friends, within like the adolescent groups, but not in a way that it's conducive of helping. Like they're not talking about it in a way of like, oh, like let me get you help. They're talking it in a way of like, oh, like yeah, I'm gonna die. Like I wanna, like I'm gonna do this in like a popular or social aspect, instead of a way that is actually seeking help. So that's where like one of the things that came in for me is, as a therapist, sitting down with those students or sitting down with those clients and having conversations about like, hey, like some of the things that you're saying, like I am concerned for you, and having someone tell them that and actually have a sit down conversation, and it's a rough conversation, they're able to really see like, oh, like I don't want to die, but like I'm having these thoughts. Okay, let's go from there. Or it's the other way where like, yeah, I am being truthful. Like it's not a joke, where other people see it as a joke.
But how often do we have adults invalidate the children that are coming forward
yeah.
and saying, I want to die? And they say, don't say that. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, no, we don't want it.
Yeah.
Like, we want them to say it. We
Yeah.
want them to say
Right.
it. Even if it's not, even if they are just joking, even if it's just, I mean, I would still rather you always say it.
Yeah, I always have that disclaimer. If someone just did this a couple weeks ago where they were just like, oh, yeah, like I want to die. And I'm like, hold on, like, let me check in. Like, is that true? Like, I've got to ask you just based off of my care for you, of your being. And they're like, no, like, I'm just joking. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, then this is like, hey, let's find other ways to express our emotions, but in a healthy way. You can still talk about it, but I do have to make sure that you're okay as well.
Yeah, it goes back to falling down. So if by chance
Yes.
you fall down, I've got to remain calm, cool, and collected so that I can see what in fact you are experiencing. Because you may be in real pain and you may start shouting immediately, and then I got to spring into action. Maybe other times where you're like, Psh, this is nothing, and you keep it moving. And because I'm stuck on, ooh, that fall looked bad. I'm making faces. I'm kind of stepping towards you with some pace, and now you're like, oh, maybe that was bad.
Yeah.
So
I
give
was
and take.
truthfully going to refer back to you saying that, because again, it goes to the self-awareness of the caregiver.
Right.
If I'm frightened or my internal distress is heightened because I'm hearing this, that's sometimes why we say, oh, you're not feeling that. That actually means I don't want to hear that.
Yeah,
Or I'm
like
frightened
avoidance.
to interact with that.
Yes.
So the conversations you're discussing about finding out what's on the other side of the ellipses or just doing the check-in, we skip all that and we either completely get away from it or become almost immediately in an intervention mindset where we have to get you shipped away to the ER. So our
Where
reaction
you'll
to
sit
hearing,
forever because
right?
there's no beds
There's
for you.
no-
And
No,
you'll be
yes, that's a
discouraged
whole
at that
nother
point.
story.
Yep.
Yes.
Why would I communicate how I feel then? Because if this is how you're going to react to it, I better keep it to
Then
myself.
I'm going to keep it to myself, right? So I agree wholeheartedly that you referred back to that because I think it's very similar.
Oh, most definitely.
And I want to expand out from caregivers because I think this is anyone
Yeah.
working with a child or adolescent population. I think that this is an opportunity for teachers, for juvenile probation officers, for CYS workers, for anyone who over hairdressers, like anyone over the course of their regular intervention, coaches that interact with these kiddos. You're given an opportunity to really show up and see them.
Yeah.
And I feel like so often when people are met with things that are uncomfortable, when people are met with things that just feel icky inside, we try to, like if you walk into a dark room, you don't try to take all the darkness and shove it into a box and stick it into the closet, right? What do you turn on a fucking light. And so when we meet these kids, we're like, let's put your darkness in a box. And it's like, no, that kid is coming to you and they're saying, please show me some light. Like, help me turn on a light. And I don't mean that in like this Pollyannish, like, look on the bright side. No, it's not like that. But create an opportunity for them to feel seen, for them to feel cared about, for them to feel loved and known. And I think in order for us to be effective in that, we need to have emotional cap space as caregivers, as
Yeah.
professionals. You know, you heard me complain about my kiddo's school. I don't want to be in education though, man. That's a.
But
that's
we
a-
are though, Kim.
Yeah,
I
it's
learned
a
that
tough
today.
gig. Yeah.
My oldest, she told me today. She said, "Dad, when you talk to me and I don't want to talk to you, and you say I can't help you if you don't talk to me, I use that too." One of her friends was feeling upset when I talked to her about something. She didn't want to talk to her. She said, "Well, I can't help you if you don't talk to me." And she
Great.
let her be. And she said, I gave her time, and then she came back to me by the end of the day, and we were able to talk.
Yeah.
So we really do model this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, if we don't show our children, if we don't show our clients, if we don't show people how to do it, then why are we expecting them to be to do it? Where would they have learned it?
We often put greater demands on our youth as well. Don't lie or you'll be punished. How
Yeah.
often do adults lie? You know,
Listen.
there's
Yeah.
so many different things that we my grandfather used to say, "Do as I say, not as I do," to my
Yeah.
mother.
Yeah.
But that concept completely denies modeling. It takes modeling out of the equation. We need to do it. It needs to be seen being done. And the other thing I wanted to reference when you're speaking about darkness, there's also a reality that if we can't bring light, then we also need to teach calmness and comfort in
the
darkness.
dark.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to balance that out, we can't always bring light. There were parts of my youth where there wasn't going to be light. I was the lead in the school play, I was the captain of the wrestling team, and then I was doing my schoolwork in a psychiatric hospital basement trying to keep up with my teammates. I was losing everything that was most important to me. So I didn't I wasn't affected positively by anybody telling me everything was great or look at
There'll be a light
everything
at the
you've
end of
already
the tunnel.
done. Yes.
Oh, the
I needed
light.
to learn how to endure the darkness as well. And that goes back to resiliency, as you said. And that's another way of educating. We can educate resilience through modeling. It's a skill through practice, through proactive things. And that's a lot of the work I try to do is how can we proactively learn these skills prior to the crisis or to the darkness?
I think also too, one of my favorite quotes, it's a musical lyric, but about darkness is, darkness truly counts, or sorry, hold on. Darkness exists so it lets light truly count. So, like that light at the end of the tunnel. But something that came up too is having trusted adults and people that are consistently there to model those things are going to do so much more than having a one-stop shop for different people that are telling you different things. So having a trusted person to model those ways to express their emotions or hearing things, and then having the resilience of actually taking that in, but having someone that they can go to model and be able to communicate those things as well is huge. And I've seen that throughout my time of working with students. I just had someone come up to me. She was in the clinic a couple weeks ago. I don't see her anymore. And she came up and she was just like, "Hi." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, hello, like, how are you?" And she was one of my kiddos that I worked with, and she ended up going into partial. She's in psychiatry. Her mom and her, we did family sessions, and it was just a very low moment that we were working together. And whenever I transitioned, we were able to find another therapist, and she stayed with psychiatry. But just seeing her, and she got into high school, like a secondary high school, and she had options, and she was just so excited to hear that. But just leaving that impact and being a person that was able to share how to regulate, how to in tune with her emotions, and share it with her mom or her parents whenever those low moments are happening, and being comfortable enough in that darkness to stick it out and be able to share that was huge to see.
Nice.
You were her guardian angel.
No.
Well, what you did was you provided what you were talking about, Lewis. We talk about adults becoming more aware of themselves. We talk about kids becoming more aware of themselves. You said the adult is the one who typically was willing to make space for the kid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you being able to be emotionally aware, you didn't have to compromise.
Yeah.
You were able to be fully present and sit with the darkness because you understood this is normal, this is natural, this is necessary. So
Yeah.
you helped her learn this is normal, this is natural, this is necessary. And then it spread like a wildfire.
Which is nice to think about. Yeah. Haven't thought of that, but
We sometimes get trapped in this idea that I can handle it for X amount of time. And there is a reality that some of us may suffer far longer than we desire or than we
Yeah.
believe we are capable of. If we go back to the suicidality, I've had many times where I believe I hate my life. I also do not want to be dead. But the length of time in which the suffering occurs is far longer than I would ever want, and there's no rewind button.
yeah.
So just navigating all of that, you don't want to tell someone something doom and gloom, but you do want them to be prepared and able to endure for as long as it is versus expecting it to end at a desired date
Yeah.
or the end of a desired period
Here's your
of time.
ETA.
Yes, I can do this for a month. I can do this for a year. And you'll hear people say, this has been happening for years. I'm tired of it. I don't want this to keep happening. We don't always have complete control over that.
Yeah. I love this idea of modeling for our children the innate suffering of life and doing it in a way that's developmentally appropriate,
Yeah.
doing it in a way. I know that our kiddos are like little sponges. They absorb us, right? They absorb the good things, right? Hey, if you don't talk to me, I can't help you. They also absorb the worst parts of you as
Absolute
well.
worst.
And they pick up on your feelings and your emotions and all those different things. And so in 2020, my husband and I both had significant losses within our family of origin. And we both reacted so differently to it. Like my husband was like, don't let the kids see anything. He's very stoic. He's very, he just did this beautiful job of like losing a parent in just like a movie loss kind of. I don't know. He did a great job at it. And me, I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit more
No, not
emotional.
you.
Yeah, but I remember even recently, my brother had Down syndrome, and so I remember sitting at it was a kids museum with my oldest son, because we're homeschooling now, so that's what we do. And so we went to the Whitaker Center in Harrisburg, and we're sitting, and there's this little boy with Down syndrome playing with my youngest, and I just started to tear up, and my son looks at my oldest that y'all met today, looked at me, and he said, "Well, Mom, are you crying?" And I was like, "Yeah. Because I'm sad. I miss my brother."
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, he died 3 years ago." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to miss him forever."
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's
okay.
okay.
But, that's
Yes.
okay. I
Yes.
love him. And so I think knowing that we don't always have to put up this, bright, shiny exterior, that we can still show our kids grief and loss and pain and suffering and, the ugly of life, but leaning also the community and leaning on each other, I think is one of the most beautiful ways we can model for our kids that it's not always gonna be Like, you're not going to make every basketball team. It's not going to be sunshine and roses. Like,
It's a hard pill to swallow.
yeah.
It's a necessary pill, and that frame can help. I remember the first time my daughter went out for her first belt. She didn't get it. It didn't go well. It did not go well. We were late getting her there. It was a cluster.
Oh no.
But let's think about how we can make it better next time. How can we be more prepared? How can we study better? I'm so glad that she didn't get it that day. And I'm so glad she got it the next time. And she stuck with it, because that just makes it more likely the next time she gets some kind of adversity, she's going to think about, I've had adversity before. It got better because I kept going. That was the only way it was going to get better. I had already had the loss.
How do we overcome some of the systemic challenges that we're seeing here today? Because we know that people are, that certain
Their eyes lit up
populations
so fast. That was great.
are disproportionately affected. So another one of the statistics that I have here to share with you all, let me get to the right one. LGBTQ adolescents are disproportionately impacted. Those from different racial and ethnic minority youth groups have disproportionately reported an increase in stress, hate, and harassment following the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that children who come from low-income populations are far more likely to experience mental health challenges as they grow up. Last but not least, rural populations, immigrant households, special youth populations, so those involved in juvenile justice or child welfare. And yet I'm the director, or I'm the executive vice president of an extremely large local community mental health organization that serves like literally every single one of those populations. And I could probably, at last glance, we turn away about 300 individuals per week seeking services, just at my organization alone. And many of those folks leave and they call someone else and they call someone else and then they call us back because no one else can get them. We had a good laugh about how there's no inpatient beds for kids and adolescents, but wow, there's
That's
no inpatient
honest
beds for kids
truth,
and
yeah.
adolescents.
Yeah.
I could hire at Pennsylvania Counseling Services tomorrow 100 direct care staff and fill them all. I mean, it's just what we're facing. So what do we do? And what are the systemic pieces that those of us who can be thought leaders within the field, what can we do to make this better?
I can speak to the mental health system as far as systemic. I'm the mental health chair of the Cumberland Perry MHIDD Advisory Board. We are currently looking at a $2.5 million deficit, meaning that programs are going to be cut. And if you think about everything post-pandemic, you can imagine that every facet of human services is also looking at cuts. So as we are understanding more and more about where these needs are greatest, this is one of the most difficult times to actually make those necessary changes. We have less people coming out of school to do this type of work. The wages are non-competitive comparatively to something like sheets or working in a warehouse, truthfully.
Yeah.
So while we're starting to realize things like equity of care and all of those things you listed, we are also at this place of near powerlessness as far as an inability to implement these things, even though we're becoming aware of how important they are and how lacking they are. So we're somewhat hamstrung when it comes to resources, which is why thought leaders, in my opinion, are almost more important at this moment than government officials, because they're going to have to figure out ways to find money and send that money where it belongs. But in the meantime, there's so much damage being done that we need communities to get together and in small groups and areas to figure out how they can try to serve their populations during this period of time when resources truly are lacking. That's the
So
kindest
you're
way
saying
to
it
say
takes
it.
a village.
I am, yes.
Oh,
And we need to
okay.
get that word out again.
Oh,
Yes.
Because it was a popular idea for a really long time, and then for whatever reason, we did this whole thing where we all went into our homes, and our neighbor became a stranger,
Right.
and our community became a place that we just kind of went to work from.
Yes.
And I think as long as we're stuck there, and we weren't stuck there just because of the pandemic, we were stuck there before that.
Right.
I think the pandemic just kind of reinforced it, because now I can get a Uber Eats to bring me that McDonald's I used to have to go out and get.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can recover from it, but I don't know if we've made a concerted effort to do so yet. And this could be a call to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What we're seeing most, and we've had town hall meetings just this month, and it's the constant solution is write your government official, write to them, tell them the problem, tell your story. And yes, that is an important piece, and yes, the money that the government has is surely going to be more than anybody can just shell out of their bank account.
Sure.
But we are at that point right now where we need the village. We can't wait for the people in the ivory towers to give us everything we need all at once. Even
Right.
when some of these solutions will be discovered, it may be years before they're actually put into effect. So we need to be more creative, looking at our village and figuring out ways to utilize the people within it to try to mitigate this damage.
I think something huge that people don't talk about, kind of going along with everything, is okay, so if you're in school and you're having issues and you have an incredible guidance counselors and team to support you, you're lucky to be at a school that has the resources. Well, guess what? I'm going to go back home to the same situation, the same abusive household. I might not have food when I get home. So it's almost like deterring of like, this is great that now we have these resources for some people in some school districts, but what about kind of the home life? So I think a lot of things kind of go back to the home system and things that we need to start fixing there. Food security is a huge issue. Harrisburg is a food desert. How can we start bringing fresh, healthy food to these communities? Because I'm sure that definitely affects you if you don't have any fresh, healthy food near you. In Harrisburg, what if you don't have, say, a car? You can't just pick up and go to Giant and get that. And then the options kind of in the city, from my understanding, of course, you have Broad Street Market, but so is someone just going to carry their groceries blocks away and just go back and forth? There's a lot of different, like maybe liquor stores and gas stations, but what about the healthy food? So I think when you talk about systematic changes, also looking outwards and things like transportation, like this is great once again if we have these resources, but if people can't get to them, kind of what's the point in some way?
I think looking at our professional workers as well, so people who are actually in boots on the ground, working with this family systems, working in the schools, working with the school system, working with the clients. The level of burnout right now is a major deficit and a disaster.
Yeah.
So finding ways to have either like the buy-ins with the clinicians coming on, or ways to actually initiate self-care, because making sure that our people are taken care of and our people are okay and healthy themselves, so like in tune for themselves again before they're working with the family system, the kids, the teachers. Because more times than not in school-based therapy, I've heard multiple conversations about the teachers coming to the therapist saying like, what do I do? So just having that like well-rounded circle around people who are working in this profession, because like Kim said, or Lewis, you said that more people are not actually taking jobs because of the funding, because of the jobs, because of the pay, but also I always think about the burnout and like the energy that it takes because of the system hounding down on these individuals trying to make a difference or trying to make some extent of a step in the right direction.
So you're saying it takes a village.
I think we
That's the
should.
title of
You
the
guys should get paid
podcast.
more. I think that's a huge thing.
And it truly will too, because if we go back to the beds, we don't have as many beds, we don't have as many services. If we start cutting down residential treatment facilities and independent living places, this is going to end up more in the schools. This is going to end up more in the criminal justice system, because
Prisons.
the places that are supposed to be
yeah.
caring for it will not have enough funds or manpower or a workforce to care for it. So you imagine filling up a cup, the water gets to the top, you're still pouring, it has to go somewhere. And in
Right.
this instance, it goes into the village. So it's coming. It's happening already, but I'm not
It's
sure it's
already
done.
huge.
Village
Yeah.
doesn't leave their hut. Like
Right.
we are so isolated.
Yes.
We are
Right.
so separate now. Like we don't, like malls don't exist anymore. Like I remember, like I was telling my kid about a mall,
Yeah.
and he's like, "What's a mall?" And I'm
Isn't
like,
it wild?
"Yeah."
You
like,
mean
it ju-
Amazon?
Yeah, He's like, "Can you order this off Amazon for me? Let's go to a bookstore." You just don't. We don't even leave our home anymore for the village to pour out into.
Right.
Those little touch points, those little human interactions that you used to be able to notice one another. And even now, like I say that I can't hire enough staff to meet the need. The one population that we have a booming telehealth program right
Very
now.
much.
And if I post a job to hire for telehealth, I get 100 qualified applicants. And so it's like, but they don't leave their house.
Yeah.
But when it's like, hey, you want to come into the clinic? Like, I've got 30 openings at Allison Hill. You want to come?
Right.
No, you've lost my number? Okay, cool. Like, that's great.
This could bring up the topic of something like wants versus needs. We're slowly, and again, I think you nailed it, Doctor, when you said that the pandemic almost justified it. But convenience is not a need.
No.
It is a want.
Yeah.
But if we tell ourselves that the discomfort we experience because something is inconvenient beyond what we want, then we almost sink and we can't go beyond that comfort level. So we start to treat something like convenience as a need.
Mm-hmm.
We are living during a time period where people need to be inconvenienced if we're going to fix this.
Right.
Yeah.
You can also look at expedience. You can look at how much time you have for leisure. There's all these different things you can look at that we're treating as needs and protecting as if they are needs, and they're actually wants. And as as a mentally ill person, I was never allowed to look at convenience as a need. I was told you have to do what you have to do, and
Because
I'm not
what you
going to get
want to do
emotional.
won't help you. Right.
Right, but it was drilled into my mind as a teenager that these things are unimportant. Denial is a convenience. Avoidance is a convenience. If there's a problem, look directly at it. All these different things that create discomfort, I was made to understand how to do and to strengthen those skills. If we're teaching people that the discomfort they experience from inconvenience means don't do it solely because you're feeling discomfort, how will we get that surge of what it actually needs done?
I think one of the things to think about too is the discomfort brings change in itself. Like living in the uncomfortable brings change because then you understand it, you look at it in the eyes, and then you see what needs to happen to go to the next step. So living in uncomfortability, yes, it is uncomfortable, but there's lessons to be learned there as well.
Lots.
Which I
Yes.
live my life by that. It's uncomfortable, but it gets me going and it has that forward momentum as well.
And resilience to be created.
Yes.
Like part of the way in which you develop a better tolerance is through tolerating.
Yes.
And there's no shortcut to that. I can't inject you with more tolerance. I wish you
Yeah.
could, man. Let's find a way. That would solve the mental health crisis. But no, I mean, there's no way to just gift somebody with resiliency or I think some of the most strong, resilient, powerful people I know are people who've overcome tremendous adversity. And that's when I look to my own clients. I don't work with the worried well. I work with community mental health. The one consistent factor across every single one of the clients that I am presently serving is a significant trauma history and socioeconomic factors that inhibit their ability to get out of a system that isn't working for them, isn't serving them. And if I had their story, would I get up in the morning? I don't know that I would. Not today. Maybe if I lived their story, I could get up today. And so I always, especially in those early days when I'm seeking to instill hope while avoiding being a cheerleader, because I'm not a cheerleader.
What do you mean? I saw the pom-poms yesterday.
Yeah. No. I was one of those weird goth kids that shaved my head. Yeah.
Must have been
Refused
someone
to believe
else's.
that punk was dead in the 90s, despite the fact it very clearly was. No, it's like this, just being able to express that, wow, you got up today and you went to a job that barely pays minimum wage to still need to go out and seek other ways to maintain food for your family. And You continued to put one foot in front of the other. You parented your kids despite the fact nobody ever fucking parented you. You showed up for your kids despite the fact nobody ever showed up for you. And like, wow, look, and then, but they're always like, well, but I wasn't perfect. You never did it before. Like, great. You successive approximations. You're getting there.
Try to talk to people like they're one of ones because that's what they are. I mean, we're walking miracles.
Yeah.
You look at the stats on us being here as individuals and how many possibilities there are. It's ridiculous. But Sarah, you asked for a one-liner. I'm going to give it to you.
I'm ready for it.
You mentioned motivation.
Yeah.
Oh, motivation. So the space between how things are and how you want them to be is all the motivation you'll ever need. It's just that simple. And
Yeah.
a lot of times people look for motivation to lead, and it follows. Momentum comes after.
Yeah.
There you go, Sarah. That was you.
Thank you very much. I'll write that down. And I think empathy is so important too. I think that a lot of times we talk about be nice to everyone and kindness and all that, but I think just empathy, just trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, make such a big difference too. Because I think a lot of people just kind of judge people in the sense of, well, okay, so an example is substance abuse. Oh, well, it's only poor people who have substance abuse problems. I can promise you, absolutely not. My whole facility is just working professionals, your neighbors, your doctors, your nurses.
Yeah.
Everyone deals with it. So I think just having empathy and understanding that a lot of people deal with stuff too is important.
And that's something that maybe systems overlook. And maybe that's part of the reason why the village idea as a starting point, think about any real social change that's occurred. It doesn't start with a bill being passed. It never has. It's always started with people. And people being able to cry out and say, hey, we are in distress, we need help. And then looking at one another and realizing, oh, we're all in this together. So I guess we better treat each other better. We better lean on one another in a way. So it seems that's consistently been history. And history has this thing about repeating itself.
Yes. And empathy too is interesting because we literally say put yourself in someone else's shoes, but if you bring your whole self, you still may not be empathizing because you would stand in their shoes and say, well, I could still do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just putting yourself in their shoes, it's also believing. It's just a belief. Absent of proof, they're telling you what they're experiencing and you believe them because you're not in their shoes. So we have a lot of people, I think, who believe they're empathizing because they'll imagine themselves in that circumstance, but they'll imagine their whole self and they'll
Yeah.
say, I could get out of this. So even their empathy comes back to insensitivity. So
Yeah.
empathy is another skill that we can talk about, but then we could also practice it and hone it and perfect it because there are levels to empathy as well.
Most definitely.
It's incredibly important.
Yeah.
I
Taking the
agree.
judgment out of things, you said that with judgment, you shut down conversations left and right. You label something, you affirm that that is the way it is, and what else is there to say about it? Whereas if you're coming at it from a curious standpoint,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I can't imagine walking in your shoes. However, I'd like to. So help me understand. Let me become more curious about it. Let me not lean on my own knowledge and understanding because I'm not the knower here.
Right.
I'm not.
It feels very comfortable to stay in your bubble too, where if you kind of have everyone who agrees with you, you're filled with yes man, you all share the same beliefs.
Facebook
So
groups.
easy. Yeah.
Yep.
Instagram.
Yes, yeah. So
Which
that's
that
really
goes-
important to be uncomfortable.
I was to say that goes great into the social media aspect as well because like the yes man, the ability to see other people's perspectives, but like how true is that perspective that people are seeing on social media as well, especially with our adolescents and high risk situations and they want to achieve or want to get to this point because this person can do it, but like what's happening off of the screen, what's happening
Yes.
outside of that,
Yep.
like who's the actual person as well.
Yes. Yes.
And I think then it leads into that, or what we see is that development of the isolation, or that like deepening the isolation. Because I've tried to put myself in your shoes, they don't really fit. Now I don't think I like you, and I can
Yeah.
completely cut you out and go over here
Yep.
and go into a space where everyone's like, "You're amazing.
Yeah.
Like I love you. I agree with everything you say." And then there's no discomfort, no leaning. It just
No growth.
totally cuts out the growth and that opportunity to develop. And then I
It
think
just
about
shrivels.
it. Just and then I think about like with my own kiddos, like when I try to empathize and understand their situation, like still I'm seeing it from this perspective in which I have a fully developed prefrontal cortex and like a doctorate and like skills and history and experiences. And I've experienced tremendous grief and loss and pain. And so like my kid, got a splinter and like he's losing it. And I'm sitting there like, I had babies.
Yes, yeah.
Are you doing like you
were
don't
my
know
splinter.
pain, but like of course I have the benefit of experience.
Right.
This splinter is the worst pain he's ever felt. And
Yeah.
before I had babies, maybe I thought that was the worst pain I'd ever feel, but we don't have that space and grace for it.
We are somewhat born. We're born fragile, and I wish that word wasn't venomized because
Ooh, I like that.
it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Human beings, especially if we are going to continue to encourage emotional awareness, we are fragile. We are fragile until we strengthen. We are fragile until we bolster. And
love it.
if you look at the physical body, we break that muscle down for that muscle to grow. Lifting weights is literally the breakdown of muscle, and then the recovery is where it grows and becomes stronger. We need to do that emotionally. So that splinter to an adult who has already gone through some of that growth can be like, oh, come on, suck it up. But to someone who hasn't gone through that yet, they're innately fragile, and that's not a put down.
No.
So I really wish we didn't use that. There's a lot of words that describe us as human beings that have been weaponized that shouldn't be, because it's preventing us from being allowed to say it. But I was fragile
Talking
when
about
I was
sensitivity,
sick.
are you? Being sensitive?
Yes.
Oh, you're sensitive.
Yes.
One of the best defenses you can give somebody. So
Right.
we're telling them to quiet down, pipe down, figure it out.
Yes.
Oh, man.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's almost our natural state. So I was fragile. I needed to be, for the sake of a better term, toughened up, not in a rude way. I had vulnerabilities. I had places that would cause me and lead me towards dysfunction, and I needed them shored up. So when we take words like that and we are not allowed to speak them, then we're not necessarily allowed to address these issues as they are. And in order to fix them, we have to address them as they are.
I so appreciate you. I'm smiling as you said. One of my favorite, Bob Furman, Dr. Furman, one of my mentors in graduate school, God rest his soul, he, in the middle of a large classroom once said, human babies are the most useless creatures on the planet. And I remember, like, there were people that were like, but like truly, I mean, you look like
Their contribution
baby
to society
goats,
is
they're
pretty
running tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like chickens, they're hopping around the minute they're out of the shell. Human babies, they need like 4 years before they do anything useful. Puppies, potty train them in a couple of weeks. Babies, feels like a lifetime sometimes. So it's, and that's okay. That's how we're
Right. made.
And to create the space and grace for that, and come to them and approach those vulnerabilities, not with annoyance or a lack of cap space or like, so often I feel like when somebody is suffering, there's a percentage of the population that faces that suffering, feels something about it, and then resents that other
Yeah.
being for creating that discomfort
How dare
within
you.
them. Yeah, like how
Yeah.
dare you make me feel that way? I don't like that.
And then it's continual. It's a cycle because
Yes.
as they continue to live with that person or see that person on a daily basis, then that resentment comes and it's down.
And I
their
wouldn't be a
being.
good family therapist if I didn't say, like, what are the intergenerational messages
Yeah.
being passed down? I mean, how many grew up with the saying, like, oh, you're going to cry? I'll give you something to cry about.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
Kids are to be seen
Yes.
and not heard.
yeah. And so
Uh-huh.
there's these intergenerational messages and even that awareness of, like, what am I doing that was done to me that I just think is so normal? And in the grand scheme of things, my childhood was phenomenal. It wasn't perfect, but it was great. But what parts of that am I, like, will my kids talk about in therapy someday?
Oh, I talk about parents, maybe before they have kids, it'd be ideal if we could maybe get them to work through their trauma first instead of parenting from their trauma. Because that child just arrived. They don't have your history. So when you're parenting from your trauma of poverty, I know I had an experience with that. It took me a while to realize I'm talking about money a lot with a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. I may be making this child far more concerned about resources than she needs to be. That's something I need to scale back because I'm parenting her out of my trauma. You do that, the kid doesn't have a reference point because I didn't have the experience. I didn't get the splinter.
Right.
But I'm just getting this pain that you keep bringing to me that's actually your pain, and you're putting it on me, and I don't know why I feel so heavy now.
Yes. And that's
Wow.
that again, I think leads us back to the original question of, what is happening with our youth's mental health? They are shouldering burdens far beyond their years.
Yeah.
And whether it's fair or not, whether it's right or wrong, it's what's happening. And
Yeah.
the stress at a young age is higher than it was for us at a young age, which is why we can argue as much as we want about whether or not it should be happening, but there's a reality that it is happening, and we have to give them the chance to endure it and to be resilient through it while we look for better ways and better foundations to build from. Because what's happening right now is that it's landing on them.
Kids are becoming kickstands. We lean on them.
Yes.
We're sitting in our homes in isolation. We don't have the neighbor to talk about the stuff with, so who we're going to talk to?
The
You're
child.
not picking up the phone to actually talk to that
Oh
friend.
God, no, never
No.
call.
Oh, no. Don't call me. No. So the kid's sitting there, and guess what? They're hearing about it. They're hearing about your stress. They're hearing about what you're going through. And they're not really seeing how you're processing that besides giving it to them.
But also just the sheer fact too, like they get access to everything, the news, everything happening.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
when I was a kid, I'm pretty sure I just like played with the grass and like I don't know, weeded the
Climbed a
weeds and
tree.
shoveled. But now kids, I mean, their worries are things like school shootings. It's like you see the atrocities going on in the nation, and I'm sure it's really scary. Where it's like I know I can't change anything, so what's next? And it's that hopelessness of like, well, nothing is going to change, I guess. So it's almost like feeling numb because if I don't feel numb, I'm going to be so sad and upset. So it's kind of like, do I laugh or cry? You know?
That
And-
numbing is such a big word right now for adolescents as well. Like, I'm not able to feel, like I'm not able to withstand what is all happening inside, so I'm just gonna numb it out. And that is more and more like the verbiage as well, like that's their go-to because they're not willing or able to identify those emotions, and when they are, like, oh man,
The
no way,
emotion's bad.
I'm not there.
Yeah.
It's bad. It's bad. It's charged. It's almost always negative. I shouldn't feel this way.
And
That's
then
the
how
best.
dare you poke at it too?
Right.
Like, oh, you got it? You got to there? Oh wait, no. Like, I'm not there.
I always know I'm doing my job as a therapist. If somebody comes in pissed off at me the next
Yeah.
session, like, you really made me feel some shit last week, and I was not here for it. I'm like, yes, earned my paycheck.
Job well done.
It's something to look at moving forward when you reference school shootings too. Is every child that possibly becomes scared to go to school, are we going to say that they have an anxiety disorder? Or are they justifiably afraid because of what they're seeing, what they're exposed to? These are the questions that we really need to ask, because it's almost like if I'm not numb, I could be showcasing something that someone might decide is symptomatic.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
as
Yeah.
caregivers and as professionals, we have to be able to sort through that. I don't think every child who's afraid to go to school because of a shooter is mentally ill.
No.
And we have to allow them to justifiably be frightened because it's frightening. And these are the types of conversations I hope professionals have.
And I think we don't put it on them anymore. I mean, when it comes to the research surrounding school shootings, the active shooter drills, the intruder drills, none of that research is promising when it comes to preservation of life in the event of a horrific outcome. And all of that research is really concerning when it comes to the impact on 5 and 6 year olds. My kiddo last year in kindergarten, he's on the playground and they had an intruder alert and they all had to run. I was talking to a colleague the other week. Her kiddo is in high school and the alarm was accidentally tripped. The alarm was faulty, but they didn't know it. And so, like, teachers are running, kids are crying. I mean, everybody thinks the worst possible situation has happened and it's the alarm was broken. But, like, how many of our kids are going to be carrying vicarious trauma from that experience? Like, our effort to, I mean, the whole premise of the fucking podcast, like, our efforts to make things better, we're making it worse.
Yes.
And so, even when, like, my kiddo had the school shooting drill, they call it Alice drills. had one this year, and I called the principal and I said, can I pull him out of that? Like, can I
Right.
opt out of that? Because as a licensed clinical psychologist and a mental health professional, I don't know that it's helpful to our children, and I know it's not good for mine, because last year after they did it, he didn't want to go to school for 2
He's like
weeks.
traumatized.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
he didn't want to go to
traumatizing.
school for 2 weeks.
Traumatizing.
And so, can I skip that? And they're like, no, you cannot skip. We can't tell you when it is,
Yeah.
because that would compromise safety, and therefore your child needs to endure. But don't worry, we talk about it in a developmentally appropriate way. There's no fucking developmentally appropriate way
possible.
to talk about shooting a child to
Yeah.
a child.
Yeah.
There's no way their brains can wrap around that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
then there-
preparation doesn't cover everything.
No.
And then they're thinking about death, and that's another thing. So a big part of my illness was how early I thought about my mortality and my fear of literally not having consciousness. So now when we have these active shooter drills, we're almost planting seeds of thinking about your mortality at an age when that should be the furthest thing from your consciousness. And again, right or wrong, if that's happening, we have to proactively allow it and try to strengthen them. Because, I mean, I have a niece who is very frightened of death now from things like active shooter drills,
Yeah.
which were occurring before COVID, by the way.
Right.
Again, so back to
Right.
what you were saying. That should have been a sign. We are literally doing drills with our students in elementary schools to understand what to do if someone comes in to kill them. That should have already been a sign.
And it involves throwing books at them, by
yes,
the way.
that
What?
And we were much quicker
Yeah,
to come up with.
my school had rocks.
We were much quicker
We had
to
like
come
a
up with
pile of
that
rocks in every classroom.
than we were to come up with any changes. Again, grassroots level. It starts with people. So we got that in place, but we are still arguing about, our rights to bear arms
Right.
and
We can't
the
even have a
limitations around it.
conversation about it.
It will
Yeah.
get a fire started in the middle of nowhere. You don't even have two people there, and it's just a fire just pops up because
flames.
you talk about guns. How dare you talk about guns? We can't talk about guns. That's
Right.
another one of those things we can't talk about because there's no way we can have an intelligent conversation around this.
right.
Everything is politicalized.
Everything.
Human life shouldn't be a topic of, left, right, green, blue, whatever.
We add the
Like it's
charge.
human life,
We
It
add
shouldn't
the
be
charge.
polarized.
It's our norm because it's more. Believe it or not, it's more comfortable. It's more comfortable to fall back into a space where it's this topic, it's this negative thing, it's this positive thing. It's not actually us.
Right.
It's actually us moving away from it. We're depersonalizing as much as possible, almost depersonalizing.
We'll talk about numbing out. I mean, I love to wrap myself in a nice cloak of self-righteous indignation. Like,
I'm so shiny.
feels good when things don't feel right. Like, it's nice to
Yeah.
just wrap yourself in outrage or injustice and like
I'm woke.
anger. That's a different podcast, Johnny. Anger is like the number one numb out drug, right? I mean, we had anger before we had medical marijuana dispensaries on every corner. Like, so we wrap ourselves in outrage and we don't have civilized, or we don't have conversations. We don't even talk about it. We just wrap ourselves up and then go into our social media feeds that are perfectly cultivated to reinforce all of our beliefs. And I don't know.
And then we don't give a space to actually unpack all of those emotions as well. So
Right.
then they're just sitting in it and waiting to burst.
Pressure
And
cooker.
social media, friendships, houses, families, they burn because of these types of things too.
And anger is proof also of fragility. Again,
Yeah.
it's not just the hypersensitive person who cries. It's if I tell you something you don't like and you yell at me, guess what? You're fragile as well. We often associate fragility with one side, but what we're looking at is massive amounts of fragility on both sides, which is why we are unable to have conversations where people disagree or on
Yeah.
those hot topics, because it either triggers us to a point of distress or it triggers us to a point of rage. Both are signs of poor emotional regulation. Some of that is because we haven't necessarily been taught proactively how to regulate, and some of it is because of our inability to actually handle the distress of what we're feeling when those things get brought up, which is why this type of education is so important.
Well, we circle back to the comfort zone.
Yes,
So
comfort is not a need either.
Just outside of the comfort zone is a place called the learning zone.
Ah.
So in order to enter that space, you gotta be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The thing is, on the other side of the learning zone is the danger zone. And I'm not talking about Archer. So when you get in the danger zone, you're actually in a place where you can't really learn.
Yeah.
You're so worked up. You're so fearful. Safety's become such a prominent issue that you actually retreat to the comfort zone and it shrinks. So
Yes.
we've got to find a way to enter into that learning zone more regularly because
Yeah.
then it'll help the comfort zone grow. We'll become more comfortable with being uncomfortable. We'll become more comfortable with disagreement, with, oh, you see it that way. I hadn't thought about that. I love it when people say that because I didn't know or I didn't think about it, but I'm willing to think about it now.
Yeah.
That's growth.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you look at growth or learning as something that's beyond the comfort zone, and discomfort is something we're being taught to avoid,
Where
then
we can learn.
learning is avoid learning
Yes.
and avoid growth.
Yeah.
So
Which is
that's
why we get in our bubbles and we
where we're
grow.
yeah.
It's all.
It really
Back
is. There are
together.
some
It really
simple
is.
and basic, and this is what's difficult. I don't have the level of education anybody in this room does. I got my associates. I've spent so much money on trying to stay afloat from medical debt. I've had ECT. I've had to take tons of meds. My life has been a roller coaster for an incredibly long time. So even when I was working in medicine, I was couch surfing. But there's a lot of basics that we can start with. And there's this desire to almost need to complicate for something to actually be relevant
Yes.
or worthy of listening to.
Yeah.
And that is not the case, especially in a crisis. When I was a charge nurse and someone was coming in right after a crisis, the last thing they needed was complication.
Yeah.
They needed basic. We need to start with basic. We need to talk about basic for hours and really hash basic out.
When I worked within a hospital system, and I was an intern, so interns get called in to handle all the things that that
Nobody else wants.
yeah, nobody else wants to do. And so, like, if there was a crisis in the ER, which is where most of the crises occur, all right, interns go, and they needed pagers, I mean, run down, and so, but I remember the very first thing I would do is like, hey, can I get you a drink?
Yes.
Can I get you some food?
You're a human
like,
being.
maybe
Yeah.
you're hungry. I'm cranky when I'm hungry too. Let's go grab a bite.
Yeah.
Let's just bring it down. And it was amazing. Like, people would be like, how'd you do? Like, they look at me like I was witchcraft. Like, it's like,
Human.
I gave them a bottle of water.
They're
and
suffering.
I said, what's your name? I'm Kim. How can I help you? Like, I showed up and I met them as a human being. And,
Yeah.
and they didn't see me, like, coming around the corner, like, all right, I'm gonna go in there. This guy might hit me. I don't know what's gonna happen next. But like breathing into it, taking a
Yep.
minute to get myself right, and then going in and meeting them as another human being who might have a need, and maybe I can't do these needs, but I can get you a glass of water and a burger.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that
She's
real
also
quick?
using a
Yeah.
cheat code. People can't physically cry and drink water at the same time. So if you find
It's true.
somebody who's
Wow.
overwhelmed, you give them a glass of water because you can't understand a word they're saying while they're
Yep.
crying, and then they start to drink the water and they just come on down.
I'm carrying water with
Homeostasis.
me everywhere I
Yeah.
go.
Homeostasis is a thing.
Very cool.
Science,
Yeah, cold water's better.
even better. Yes.
But I think that's so true. It's just this feeling of being human. I think right now we're in this world which, like you kind of mentioned, justifiably so in some circumstances, but people are so scared to say the wrong thing. People are scared to have opinions. People are scared to talk about just about every topic now is somehow political. But I think it's important to just be human and just talk about things. But I feel like we're kind of losing that and almost like we have to be a certain way or you're wrong or you're this or you're that. And it makes people scared to want to open up and talk.
So how do we? I think our time is winding down. So how do we find hope in the hopeless? Right? Like right now, we're like, yeah, school shootings, and the planet is getting hotter, and there's food scarcity and water scarcity in certain parts of the country, and too much water in other parts of the country, and no one can talk to one another. And like meanwhile, I'm raising like two beautiful little boys. And when I look at them, I'm like, shit, I gotta leave the world better than the way I found it for you. And like, that's my responsibility as a parent. It's why I do what I do, is that I serve a community that my kids are gonna grow up and maybe live within someday. Or maybe maybe they'll get out of here. I don't know. Maybe they'll move to a city or something. But how do we take what we know, take our resources, take the hands that we are dealt, to create an environment in which when kids wake up and they listen to this podcast, my kids can't because they'll be like, "Mom, you said the F word." But we edit that out, and then we let the kids listen to it. Like, how do we help our children see that it's not all for naught? I mean, this is the generation that unfortunately is going to be tasked with cleaning up a lot of this mess, and so I don't want them out there numbed out, feeling like it's all hopeless. I never think it's hopeless. I'm an eternal optimist. I believe it can always get better, and maybe we can't make it 1,000% better, but we can make it 5 or 10% better, and that's what I'm committed to doing. So where is the hope that we can find from our individual locations and perspectives and situations?
I'd say the distress. The space between how things are and how you want them to be is all the motivation you will ever need. People are not happy with the way things are. And they have not been happy with the way things are for some time. And with everybody expressing themselves with, tattoos, T-shirts, bumper stickers, all that good stuff. Podcasts, whatever it might be. People are speaking up. And that right there is hopeful. That we're not suffering in silence completely. That kids aren't suffering in silence completely. The stats are there. They are going to people at their schools and saying, "I'm hurting. I've got a splinter. I don't want to live anymore." They're doing that. That means they believe that maybe if they told somebody, they could help them. That sounds as hopeful as ever gets. And then we build on that. We build on that with the podcast, with the T-shirt, with the bumper sticker, with the village. We build on that with people sharing their experiences on both sides of the process. And for those who are in the midst of both sides of the process, there are a lot of people working in our field who are clinically diagnosed.
Yes.
And sharing that more often, being vulnerable, saying that it's okay, that you don't have to be a way to be well.
Yeah.
Wellness is individualized. We find it. We don't just have it all the time.
I think also being okay with saying, "I am not well." I think that's something in the last couple years for myself personally. If I'm struggling, like, I will go to my prospective people and have the ability and not feel shameful of saying, "Hey, I'm not doing well." I think something too is meeting people where they're at in their particular situations, and not having all the answers is okay as well. As like a human being, but also as a clinician or a working professional, we're not supposed to have all the answers. So the fact that we're meeting with our clients and being able to sit down and just kind of sit there with them, I think is a hopeful predisposition, because of us having answers and saying like, "Oh, you should do it this way, you should do it this way," that's setting them up to say like, "Oh, like, I have to rely on another person to give me the answers." Instead of sitting with them and just being with them in that moment.
Being curious.
Being curious, and I love that word, the curious questions, because in like my experience in my lifetime, having someone being curious and having the ability to share my story along the way, it's gotten more comfortable to share my story and then be able to share that with other people, and showing hope in the resilience in your path as you go on.
And that's the beauty of the peer specialist role. Your last podcast, you had used the reference of being the Uber driver. Well, the peer specialist is the one getting into the Uber, and the consumer is the person driving. Right, wrong, or indifferent, whether they're going too fast, whether they don't know where they're going. The peer specialist is just there saying, "I'm along for the ride," versus "I'm driving." And you, whether they make a wrong turn or not, you're just there with them throughout the entire process. So you have a treatment team of people who are doing all of these instructions and advising, and they all have these special positions. The peer specialist is the one who's almost subservient in a way. I'm going to get into the car that you're driving, and I'm going to be here and be present with you while you figure it out. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong of a choice. I'm still going to set boundaries. I'm allowed to say, "Well, this is making me uncomfortable," but if you make a choice that I disagree with, that's not for me to say. It's for me to be there when you realize it was a choice that maybe you shouldn't have made, and then we make the next choice. So that's the beauty of the peer specialist position. And I love that people in higher positions are also taking that mentality and using some of that disclosure responsibly to create a greater rapport. As far as hope, if we go back to history, I think one of the most hopeful things is that our species has proven that they are able to endure long-term difficulties. But we also need to look at history, and one of the things history tells us is that leaders and followers are equally important. So if we start to breed the mentality that everyone is solely meant to be a leader, and we don't have people willing to follow, you look at something like the Million Man March with Martin Luther King, that's the first thing that comes to mind. There were so many people there whose names we don't know.
Yeah.
We knew the name, we knew that Martin Luther King Jr. was there. But there were so many people there, and that picture and that moment is still resonates in our history. That was a leader and followers, and they were of equal importance. Our best chance at surviving whatever may be ahead is realizing that it is just as important to follow as it is to lead, and uniting our forces for people with like minds and saying, okay, you're the leader. Great.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
follow. Let's do this. We're teaching people that following is almost embarrassing, or a role that is lesser than, and that's making a lot of this stuff fragment. We have so many groups with the same intention that resources get divvied out and lessened and all these different things. So just the concept of encouraging our youth, whether you are a doctor or whether you work at a gas station, nothing is more or less important. And the unity of us as a species gives us the best chance to move forward. Hope is a huge part of my life. It is abstract. It is a belief. It is not an action. It will not get you out of the hole that you are in. But when you are in a very dark place, sometimes it's the brightest light, and it's at least something that you're able to look at, even if it's far away. So I believe that we need to encourage and instill hope, but also explain that it's not an action.
Yeah.
Action still needs to be taken. Steps need to be taken. But through action and belief, the belief that we can, the belief that it's possible, the combination of those two is why it's what I hope to pass on to these generations. We can do this. We really can. And I'll avoid getting emotional, but we really can. There
I
are
get
some lessons
emotional.
we need to learn, but we can.
Yeah.
I want to give you permission to get emotional.
Yeah, like
Just
I'm
being, you know.
emotional just with like the passion and it. What hit me on that was the abstract. Like it's not an actual thing that you see or hear. It's something that it's a belief, but then like moving forward for that.
Yes.
Like that is so strong. I'm taking that with
Yes.
me
Abstract
today.
has value.
That hit me.
We've diminished it
and
too
I'm gonna
much.
think
Yes.
about that more of just like oof.
We don't want to tell every one of our mentally ill youth that on the other side of your illness, you're going to be a famous musician.
Yeah.
On the other side of your illness, you're going to be a best-selling author. You might work somewhere that already exists. You might not start your own business.
And that's okay.
And that's all still awesome. And recovery. I chose to become a nurse. I didn't choose to become a doctor after that or even a nurse practitioner. I stopped at nurse. I wanted to care for people. I didn't try to start my own business or anything. I just chose to become a nurse. And that is as awesome as someone who becomes a famous public speaker because of what they suffered through.
Yeah.
So we don't want to encourage that singular pathway of suffering and then fame.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's suffering and then assimilation
The
back into the group.
monetary value of it too.
Right.
Like of
Yeah.
the fame of like this happened to you. Like oh now I can get something from it.
Right.
Instead
It's
of sharing and
just
yeah.
get back to whatever you can get back to, and you can. And it'll be difficult, and you can. And you will be challenged, and you can. Instilling those types of mindsets versus telling them what's happening to you isn't fair, and you don't need to do anything forward until it's fixed. That is a very dangerous precedent to set, where you are allowed to halt your own growth until
You're good
whoever
enough.
hurt you changes it, or until you change a certain thing, or until the world around you changes. Then you're allowed to go back. all we're doing is halting the growth.
But that's a dangerous mindset to adopt it. I mean, I can think about it certain times. It's like, oh, I'll be happy when this happens.
Yes.
Goalposts.
Um,
It's
Conditional.
moving.
And I'm gonna just white knuckle it
Right.
until I
Yeah.
get there. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna endure. And there's something beautiful about enduring, right?
Sure.
There's something powerful in that, and
Endurance has its limits for a
it
reason.
has its limits. And at a certain point, you're no longer you're just enduring,
Right.
versus taking that, synthesizing that data, and saying because of X, Y is where I need to go with it.
I have an active nursing license, a certified peer support specialist certification. I've written 3 books. Right now, I'm washing dishes and a prep cook at a brewery so that I can do all of this advocacy for free. And because
Wow. Yeah.
the other jobs I've applied for that were offered to me, my education isn't high enough, this and that.
Yeah.
And I still have belief that what I'm doing is awesome compared to where I was. It's
Yeah.
not unimportant, it's not embarrassing, and I still have hope for what forward might look like. But at any given time, if I have to do what is necessary, I'm able.
Yeah.
And if we can instill that in our youth without as much hardship and as much damage in the process, then our hope should remain as limitless as ever. We just need to instill that unity and that work ethic that we can do it, and our best chance is if we do it together with
Yeah.
that village.
I think that the thing that kind of changed my life to go along with that was someone who told me a hard truth of one, unfortunately, no one can really save you.
Yes.
That definitely sucks. And then two, because sadly no one saved me, you have to save yourself, but everyone has the ability to create a life that they love to live. So even though if things are really difficult and hard, and I'm not saying it's going to be an overnight thing and this isn't going to be challenging or difficult, but we do all have that ability. So I hope that in itself that might be hope for some people that you can change things. It's going to be hard, but you can do it.
I think to wrap us down here, and one of my Johnny got to brag about his kids, so I have to brag about mine for a second.
Oh, yes, we brag.
Just for a
we
second.
brag about
just
these
for a
people
minute.
we've helped bring into the world.
And so I would say, I think one of the strengths and gifts of this newer generation, we talked about empathy, and I think the millennials, we do a lot wrong. You're not millennials, but
I am.
maybe you.
I'm like very, very beginning of
86.
it.
We're right there,
So,
yeah,
I'm
85. So
83.
So we're all in that, and I think we did a lot, the Paris Hilton, I don't know, there's a lot of things that we fucked up, but I think we've done a good job about talking about mental health, talking about the human experience, sharing what the stoicism of the boomer generation. I think we've taken some of that and said, like, no, I'm struggling, I'm suffering, we're able to talk about it more, and created, I think we're instilling in our kids and adolescents today that experience of empathy and being able to really think about and consider somebody else's space or social location or the stories before the part of the story you get to be a part of. And I think my 7-year-old just sort of had a shit year, just really hard year, a lot of bullying, a lot of challenges, ended up pulling him out towards the end. And I remember when I was just trying to help him make meaning out of it. I'm a psychologist, so that's what you do. You make meaning out of your suffering.
And he had to do it at 7.
And he has to do it at 7 because
Now.
it's objectively healthy. And so it's just like, why do you think that's happening, buddy? Like, what do you think? And he's like, well, maybe his home life's not so good. And I was like, man, look at you.
Yeah.
Look at you. You didn't make it a static trait. You didn't say he's a bad kid.
And he didn't personalize
You
it.
didn't personalize
Yeah.
it. You
Yeah.
didn't make it about you. You contextualized it. And if I've done nothing else, as a parent,
That's
at
a
least
win.
creating that environment where you can look at the context and you can say, 1 + 1 + 1, it's going to equal 3 every time. And so, can we zoom out and look a little bit more at the context? And I think ultimately, maybe it's because we've gotten better at being storytellers as a species. I think we're really good at telling stories through media. I think there's excellent books out there for kids now. So I think where maybe our kids don't have everything they need, I think that's one thing that we're really helping them achieve and develop is that ability to put themselves in someone else's shoes have that empathetic stance and zoom out and look at the whole person, and create space and grace for them. So, meanwhile, thank you all for joining me here today. I so
Yeah, of
deeply
course.
appreciate
Yeah.
your willingness to start this very critical conversation. I hope that this is the beginning of our 3-part series to really talk about kids in crisis. I promise that after this, we are going to get back to the lighter, fluffier things. We are also working on a podcast about why is everyone so obsessed with murder shows. So that'll be our
I'm one of
next.
those
Yeah,
people.
that'll be our next light and fluffy way in which we look at the paradox in which we search for joy in all the most terrible of places.
I gotta get an answer to that one because I am definitely perplexed by it.
Yeah, I'm confused too. So I've invited a bunch of people who love murder shows, and we're going to
Nice.
chat through that. But
Love it.
thank you all. Thank you for your willingness, your
Yeah.
vulnerability, your connection, and ultimately for sharing your hope. I appreciate you.
Thank
Thank
you.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.